The squirrel was magic!
Beware your human heart. This is Diabolical Index for October 1st, 2018, where the pages of the uncanny reside. I'm Corey Dawson, as always, from the Nut House in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is the beginning of one of my favorite times. This is what I call the month of Halloween. I don't celebrate days of Halloween. And I also always spell my Halloween with a apostrophe. The Halloween. That's my favorite. That's my fetish. I'm obsessed with it. So, yeah, coming back after a small hiatus. Sometimes things pop up, get in the way. It becomes difficult to pay as much attention as I need to. And tonight is going to be, oh my God, we had as many technical difficulties as you could possibly have, but I think it just has to do with the amount of front loading that I did to be prepared for the books versus movies adaptation judgment extravaganza. I have to say that I don't know. I guess there were a few things that I kind of cheated. Took it a little bit easy on myself. I'm usually the more optimistic of the critics, unlike some reviews. But yeah, stop your laughing, boy. I still, hold out hope that that could happen. Previews 2019. Let's do this. But with the books versus movies, this is also a non-entry. I have been doing my official, I guess you go stodgy kind of lecture-like entries lately. I've been trying to, I don't know, evolve, be a little more fluid, malleable, according to people showing up and being interested in books, and just talking about them and different things, their favorites, their dislikes and stuff. But in my case, when I was going for the best and the worst, there's not really a best and a not. I mean, there are. It's all subjective. It's all subjective. People like different things for different reasons, and when it comes to best and worst, you kind of have to think of the best because of and the worst because of. A lot of times with any kind of adaptation from print to screen, in any silver screen, large screen, small screen, internet, streaming, whatever, you kind of have to take it into account. I think there may be more, but I think there are 5 ways that you can adapt something from print media to the screen. And the first is getting the language on point. The second one is getting the tone on point. The third is getting, both of those wrapped up in a package as close as you can, but still differing slightly. And then you have the absolute adaptation, faithful, word for word, absolute adaptations. And then you have the 5th version, which is put the name on there that people recognize and then make everything else different. Or, for whatever reason, sometimes there are egos involved in place. And actually, it seems like as I go along tonight, is when I go over the things that I've already done, things I've already thought about, just new ones keep popping into mind. So I'll probably be bringing those up as well. I just thought of one when I said ego, I immediately thought of Tom Cruise. So make of that whatever you will. But if I if I seem kind of wrung out, it's because my weekend went so quickly. I can't even tell you. I can't even put it into words how my weekend was almost a blur. And that's probably because on Saturday morning early, I went to easily one of my favorite things that exist on this planet. Not in person form. There are people that outweigh it. But when it comes to pastimes and different little adventures I like to get into, definitely, and this is going to come as a surprise to no one, one of my absolute favorites on this earth is going to a library bag book sale, where they just say, hey, here's this cardboard bag, something you might see at Aldi's or one of the older green grocers from back in the day, no plastic involved, and they say, well, we're culling some of the older books and lesser known books and lesser received books, and we're culling them, we're making room for the new flesh. So when they do that, they have these big library sales, and it's how Paradox City Books and Games has survived, in the past and stuff. So, but I mean, to say that it's just for that is totally silly. Usually, and this is being conservative too, I'd say that a third of those books go into my coffer. I mean, like easily, personal, everything. And it's kind of catch as catch can. It's not always the fun adventure that it could seem. A lot of times there are some unscrupulous buyers that are there with no love for the medium, with no real interest in what they're getting. They either shuffle everything into bags or not even pay attention, or they scan them with their phones to see what they can make out of them on eBay and then put them in there if it's lucrative enough for them. And that really burns my ass whenever I go there for that. I mean, granted, I do sell them as well in some capacity, but I would have to say that 9.5 times out of 10, I am picking them out of sheer love for it, interest in it, I've heard of it. I love it. You know, I'm getting it because I myself am interested in it, or I know someone specifically who is. So that's the way I do things. But in this case, it tends to be a battle. There are friends of mine that I've had come with me in the past, and very few of them can go the distance. A lot of times they'll hang with me and they'll go that one time, but then they'll figure that they don't want to go through that gauntlet again. So I put the communique out to my friends and stuff, and I let them know, you know, I'm going. You want to get in on this, and they refused me for all kinds of crazy excuses. Some of which I'm sure were true, but other ones were, you know, it was the weekend, Saturday morning. They don't want to get up early in the morning and go rifle through these things, which happens to be, you know, the greatest and most wonderful bliss that could ever exist. They don't know the difference, and that's their loss. But it just so happened that in this case, I was in incredible luck. I ended up showing up, and usually when you go to these things, there are the veterans and the newbies, and veterans, newbies, and people who are just going to visit the library to borrow things from the library, and they just came across the sale by accident, or they're not interested at all. Well, in this case, I was able to. None of the big buyers were there. None of the shitheels, as I like to think of them, were there, clogging up the reins, getting in the way, and all that type of stuff, just to get stuff that he couldn't even give two shits about. So I ended up being the first one through the glass, and that's another thing to realize. Libraries do not open their doors early. They opened at, and I said early in the morning, it's not really early for me either, but it was 10 a.m. They open their doors at 10 a.m. and 1 second. They don't open early for anyone, as far as I can tell, unless you work there and then you're going through a back door. So I was standing there, and there were kids playing, and it was just a wonderful morning. And the glass doors open up, and I stride in, and I'm the first one in the door for the sale. The first bag was bought by yours truly. And I go in the back, and I lay waste. For whatever reason, it turned out that they had moved a great number, because, you know, they have these sales all out throughout the year, and you end up seeing things repeating. And in this case, for whatever reason, they had so much new stuff that I hadn't seen, and I filled 2 bags in 5 minutes, which is totally unlike me. Even in like a speed round, I never get that. So when I was done, I easily had at least close to, if it wasn't a personal record at the book sale, it's got to be close. It has to be close. And I ended up sending a video of gloating straight to the people who had dogged me out to hit the sale, and I just kind of poured over what I had, and, you know, made a circuit of my car to show them. And Andrew, you got that? Okay. But and yeah, I was looking rough in that one too. But does it have a sound on that one? Okay, so go ahead. Oh yeah, language. There's language on this one, but I was, you know, I was really going for it.
So, I'm not gonna say you guys fucked up, but
That's me looking over the interior of my compact car.
I think you fucked up. So,
I was really rubbing it in. If this gives you any inclination, the bags were $5 a piece, and I bought 11 bags. It took me 4.5 hours going through thousands and thousands and thousands of books to find the ones that I needed. And they had graphic novels and DVDs and books on CD and music and sheet music, all kinds of stuff. BPRD, Bitch Planet, Chew, Preacher. I found some Babar. You know, you rarely ever see Babar anymore, the king of the elephants. Are you familiar with Babar, Andrew? Awesome. It's good to find someone who is, because a lot of times I have it in the shop, and for some reason it goes unnoticed for months and months and months and months and months. And then there's some, you know, wizened old people that come in and go off about Babar. So there you go. It probably means nothing to anyone else, but it was an absolute blast. By the time I got home, I was nutrient empty. I had sweated myself through, and it wasn't even a fight. It was kind of a slaughter, really. But just to have kind of like the ease of movement throughout that thing was just a blast. And one of the ones I found there was called Four Color Fear. And if you wouldn't mind bringing that up. Four Color Fear is a book about, it's a retrospective of the forgotten horror comics in and around the witch hunts, the seduction of the innocent, with Wortham and his clan trying to destroy comics due to their bad influence on children. And some of the ones were a little bit more low rent than E.C. William Gaines's Vault of Horror and Tales from the Crypt, things like that. It was even more low rent than those guys. And Four Color Fear is a retrospective of the more little known comics of that time that dealt with the macabre, supernatural, and topics of revenge, motive, moral, and retribution in one way or another. And they're really weird. A lot of them were so strange that they were kind of a little bit hard to understand at some point. But anyway, that was it's awesome. It's Fantagraphics who puts out a lot of great looking books in the graphic variety, and I totally recommend anyone checking anything that Fantagraphics puts out. It had a lot of great artists in there, including Basil Wolverton, who is totally recognizable if you've ever seen his art. It's totally wild. I think that was there a cartoon called American Monsters at one point? I think it was on Comedy Central or Sci-Fi, and it was this really unusual cartoon style. Kind of, I like to think of it as like kitschy, like the 1950s style, like bright neon colors, where you'd see the executives with devil horns and stuff. Yeah, Paul, definitely. Tales from the Crypt. You'd probably love that Four Color Fear because it's the same. It's the same species, except like for instance, in one of them, there was a guy who kind of pined for. It was a mutual friend of this couple, and he ends up dressing up like a zombie, like, okay, Paul's on it. Yeah, that, so if you, he said it was on Comedy Central, American Monsters. I think it was called something like that, but that's the kind of art that Basil Wolverton did, and it was featured in Four Color Fear. Yeah. But anyway, he dressed up like a zombie, even with, like, makeup and prosthetic appliances on his face and everything, and he brought in like rotting meat, and he just like wouldn't leave these people alone because they thought he committed suicide because they eloped to get married, and then he just becomes such an unbearable house guest as a zombie that they ended up burying him, and it turned out that he was just dressed up as a zombie, so they ended up burying him alive due to some voodoo witch doctor's potion to make him rigid again. It was crazy. So anyway, tonight, and Tales from the Crypt is kind of a good place to start because that was definitely one print to screen that was completely not only faithful, but it was like revolutionary. It brought him back from obscurity, relative obscurity, because these guys kind of got together and they realized that they had loved this stuff so much that they wanted to bring it to everyone, and Tales from the Crypt happened. So, I mean, there were some, they took a lot of liberties with the stories and different places and stuff, but that's, again, another one of those things where if you get the tone right, if you get the gallows humor correct, then you're going to have everything you need. And the directors were fantastic. The writers were fantastic. They had actors from all over the place coming in to do those. So that was definitely. I mean, I wasn't even going to bring that up because it was such an unbelievable success. So, but as I was going through these, I was thinking of the books and the movies that were to come after, and I was kind of thinking of kind of like an abbreviated. Well, I guess it's not abbreviated. There are like 9 or 10 of them, but I was thinking of the book genres that lend themselves to adaptation into film, television, and I could find one or more in each genre. I thought that I was going to come up dry for stuff that I had read. There were some things I'm a little bit light on, but and also at the same time, there are some that kind of are genre bending, could go into multiple genres, or flow into one or the other pretty seamlessly. So there were some where I took liberties with which ones I used for which genre. So so I guess we'll get into it, because due to our late start, we're already almost at 10 o'clock. So I do have to use my what would you call this, the TJ go-to method, something like this. But hey, I mean, he was contacted by a horror director, so I'm never going to shut up about that. Okay, so the first one, the first genre that I wanted to list was adventure, and in this case, this is one of the ones where I kind of cheated slightly. It's not as if this isn't an adventure. It's just that in this case, I guess you could say that it's a little more than just your basic adventure story, and that is Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Every time someone comes into the shop, I recommend this book. I ended up finding this book in a little shop in Muncie on the campus of Ball State University called Three Blind Mice, and all of the people who ran it were blind, and some were in further states than others, and sometimes they would they would read each other books and record them, and so there was definitely it was the tenor of storytellers that was in that place all the time, and it was totally cozy, and it was eclectic and wonderful. But I ended up finding this book, and I thought that the cover, there are very, very few editions of this that don't have this cover. There's this cover, and it's a large paperback, so it's probably about the size of a hardback book, but it's paperback, which is wonderful. It's kind of odd to find, but I love it when I can find them, because sometimes the smaller pocket paperbacks, they can't take the strain of being open and closed multiple times. But in this case, it's a very executive looking. To what you could see, it looks like a headless executive, but in fact, he is invisible. And what really turned me on about this book, and what I'm going to get into when it comes to the movie adaptation, is that kind of like the crux of this book, the thing that made this book most interesting to me is that it had to do with the mundane. It was more interested in the mundane than the fantastic. So even though he's been turned invisible, Nick Holloway, who's the protagonist of the book, he doesn't have to deal with the fantastic pitfalls and adventure of being an invisible man. He has to deal with things as mundane as being able to walk down the street without someone, not acknowledging that you're there, and accidentally hitting you with something, or running you over, or doing a bunch of different things that they wouldn't have done had they know you were there. So, but that's not to say that no one ever can detect that he's there. It's just that a lot of times it's something as simple as the airflow seems different. You can tell when someone walks into a room, they might walk under a vent, and then the airflow seems kind of strange for a moment. But if we don't see anything, then we kind of like chalk it up to whatever, who knows what, a draft, or the sun passing through the clouds, or a change in barometric pressure, or something like that. So if we can't see it, a lot of times we attribute all kinds of different stuff to it and don't even think of what it could be. Some people, I guess, you know, if they're sensitives, my sister's a sensitive, where she'll walk into a place and she'll know if something bad has ever happened there. I don't have any of those things. All my family in one way or another has slight variations on that, and I have none. So I don't know exactly what that means. But in this case, when you transfer from the mundane, and not to say there isn't adventure, because there are people out to get Nick Holloway, but there's one thing that he exhibits in the book that, I mean, he slightly exhibits it in the movie. I mean, I guess he really does, but we have the trailer for the movie of Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and it was starring Chevy Chase and Daryl Hannah, and they put it together as an action-adventure comedy with, I mean, I guess a slight taste of the sci-fi, and that's where John Carpenter came into play. He ended up directing this, and it was a real departure from things that he had done in the past. I guess there were kind of like tastes of Big Trouble in Little China to it, but I don't. It's one of those things where Chevy Chase did a fine job in bringing the executive, or more like the kind of like the slacker playboy, upper crust type of sensibilities to it. And in one way or another, it never really totally inhabited the book's feel, and I think it's because the book is so rich with all the small things he had to deal with. But in the case of the movie, then they really focused on the chase from the government agent who wants to enlist Nick Holloway as a weapon. And it's kind of a shame that Chevy Chase didn't do more serious things, because in this movie, and I guess to a lesser degree in Fletch, which is another book to movie, which did okay, but for whatever reason, I think that Chevy Chase, at least in his heyday, I usually think of the heyday of these Saturday Night Live guys as if Chevy Chase has the ball cap with the wings, if he's got the hair wings coming out of the side of the ball cap, and if Steve Martin has dark eyebrows and white hair, then you know that it's going to be good. Anything past that is just failure in a lot of ways. But in this case, Chevy Chase kind of there were some dramatic moments in the movie that I guess slightly kind of took on the. I guess that in the book, there's just a lot more at stake for the long term, and it's difficult to see that in a film where you have to have someone, you know, exist. You find out who they are. They get into a struggle. They try to get out of that struggle. They meet people along the way. They might fall in love, and then there's a climax. It's difficult to have a lot of long-term effects when you're dealing with a 90-minute movie or whatever. But we have that trailer we can put up. So I'm going to put up the trailer so you can kind of see the flavor of the movie as opposed to the kind of mundane, not flatness of the book, but it has a lot more to do with the chase, which is to say Chevy Chase.
It all started on a Tuesday in March. If George hadn't introduced me to Alice...
Let's not do anything cheap and meaningless.
Okay, what do I owe
Was
you?
that?
She hadn't been so spectacular. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten so loaded that
Yeah.
night. Be as good as new.
See, as you can see with the spilling of the coffee, and he's kind of like in the sauna area, and everything goes haywire, and then he just kind of wakes up invisible. That's straight out of the book. And he has the luxury of, in the book, he can wear his clothes. His clothes were also turned invisible, so he doesn't have to constantly run around naked. There are a lot of... there are just as many... not inconsistencies, but inconveniences in the books as there are conveniences. A lot of the stuff that he has to do on a daily basis, he can't even eat and be in the daylight, or else you'll see kind of like this swirling ball of puke, like walking through the hallway. So he has to. Sunlight causes, I think that H.F. Saint, who's the author of the book, I think he had to do a lot of research, and one of the things he came up with was that we digest faster and we metabolize faster in sunlight. So in the book, he just had to lay under a sun lamp for a few hours, and then the stuff he was digesting was gone, so he wouldn't give himself away. Which is kind of like it's the cornerstone of the book, is not being found out, but at the same time is kind of like the sorrow of not being acknowledged by another human being, and until he meets up with Daryl Hannah's character. So in a lot of ways, in the preview and in the movie, there's kind of a confusing tone where there's kind of like the depression of not being able to reveal yourself to someone, and in most cases being impossible to do that, and at the same time you long for someone to know that you're there, which I guess is kind of like, I guess it's kind of the basis for that type of a story. But in Invisible Men, invisibility stories, a lot of times there's madness or murder and things that go along with that. Actually, speaking of murder, Sam Neill is in that movie. I think he's one of the shining parts of it. He makes a wonderful foil and an enemy for Chevy Chase's Nick Holloway. So I guess that around this time or slightly before it, they were considering him for James Bond. And when you see him in this movie, it's totally easy to see him in the role of kind of like a lethal secret agent. So I guess when it comes down to it, this is one of those ones where it has a similarity to the book in some ways, but it's kind of a distillation of a lot of things. I mean, which you have to do in most cases, but I think that the tone was slightly wrong. I think that Memoirs of an Invisible Man would have been a lot better served with kind of like the Game of Thrones treatment, or maybe like a Sherlock or something, where you'd have like six miniseries, 6 episodes of hour and a half a piece, and you could really go through the story, because there's a lot to it. And like I said, I totally recommend it to everyone. Another one that I recommend that I don't have any gear for, because it's definitely one of my worst adaptations, would be The Club du Mans by Arturo Perez Reverte. It's one of the ones I have 2 books that I always recommend, and Memoirs of an Invisible Man is one, and The Club du Mans is one of the others. And the Johnny Depp movie, The Ninth Gate, was based on part of The Club du Mans. That's one of the things that it just makes you wish they never made a... I mean, I like to watch it because of the way I am, and the way everybody who knows me knows, is that it has to do with book detectives and assassins that have to do with like book deals and stuff. So of course I'm going to be interested in it. But once I read the book, I watched the movie first, I read the book, and I realized that they had thrown like 2/3 of that book in the trash in order to make this movie, or that movie, The Ninth Gate. So I wasn't even going to go through it on this, because I had to get pessimistic. I actually get pissed about that movie adaptation, because they threw so much away, and I would love to see them give it another shot. And Johnny Depp, I could totally throw him away as the character he played. He doesn't embody it for me, so there'd be no loss for it. And it's Roman Polanski, and there's a detached feel to his stuff, just due to being like a kind of an expatriate American, an exile, due to all the stuff that he got into. So there you go. Ninth Gate. Watch it. It's fun, but don't attribute it to the Club du Mans. Just think of them as 2 different things. That's what I have to do. So the second one on my list fell under the children's category, and this is definitely one of the ones that's almost a I don't want to say carbon copy, because that sounds that sounds negative. But in this case, this is one where it translated instantly and beautifully and fantastically from the book to the screen, and it's most likely because of Neil Gaiman's writing, and Dave. I think it's Dave McKeown. I'm not sure. I looked around everywhere for a pronunciation of this guy's name, but he does a really odd kind of like almost like a collage type of art. He had done it on one of the most famous graphic novels in the Batman mythos, the Batman Arkham Asylum, before anyone knew, or before anyone used Arkham Asylum in their daily vernacular. He had done a graphic novel about Batman basically, delving into the pits of hell. But in Dave McKean's work, I'm tempted to say McEwen. I'm just going to say McEwen. If it's wrong, then somebody just let me know. But you can see like pieces of photographs and pieces of fabric, and it kind of reminds me almost of, if you remember the movie Seven, the way that John Doe put his diaries together. It kind of looks like that, where it looks like things were cut out and pasted in, and that's kind of the way that the Leica cartoon. Did you bring up the Coraline cover?
I haven't said it yet.
Yes, I did.
I didn't say the name of it.
I know I said Coraline. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. But Coraline was the book first, and it's almost it's one of those things where it was so seamless that I think a lot of people weren't even aware that Coraline was a book first. But when you see the art, actually I saw a version of Coraline where someone used a more cartoonish, kind of like comic book like art to it, and it just looked all wrong. So in this case, it's definitely a seamless transition. I saw a Coraline for the first time last year, and I ended up finding the book, which is the order I normally like to do it in. And it's just wonderful. Both sides of the coin. It couldn't have been better. I mean, Neil Gaiman is so steeped in the fairy story, and often the ones that don't necessarily have the brightest environments or endings or beginnings, for that matter. So for him to be writing children's books, which I think he's done a few now, I think it couldn't have been a better pair. So bring that trailer up. So if anyone hasn't seen Coraline, do yourself a favor and totally just buy it and watch it, because it's fantastic. Just like all the Leica cartoons. I don't know. I hesitate to call them cartoons because they're much richer than that. But here's Coraline.
Coraline Jones always dreamed of finding a better world.
I think he was involved. It might have been Henry Selick. Henry Selick was the guy who kind of teamed up with Tim Burton for Nightmare Before Christmas and The Corpse Bride, but to be honest with you, I totally forget. But this would have definitely been something that he would have gotten behind, because I mean, it just couldn't get any more Tim Burton-esque with. Has she done it yet? Well, maybe not. Well, damn it. Has it shown that yet? Oh, okay, good, okay. I couldn't quite see from this distance, but yeah, the button eyes thing, that's straight out of a fairy. I mean, it seems like if these guys wouldn't have made this story, then Guillermo del Toro would have. It's that dark fairy tale with that kind of like the Venn diagram kind of fades into normal life, and you know that behind every mirror, under every bed, there's another world. And in her case, it's some sort of tunnel. I can't remember if it goes from like a mousetrap or a mouse hole or what, but it's fantastic where she finds these alternate parents that she doesn't quite like the way things are going in her normal life, so she wants to go to the other side and see if it would be better where the other half lives. But the problem is the other half that you find is normally the darker one. So it's just wonderful. It's totally beautiful. It's fast-paced. It's atmospheric. It's funny. The characters are well thought out and just rich as hell. So, and there's some people who might say, "Well, this might be a little too intense for the kids," or whatever. It's like, well, no. The point is that that's where these fairy tales come from. There are things in the world to be feared, and there are things to be loved, and you can find beauty in the darkest places. So, I think that it's silly, and I think that it's irresponsible to not expose children to the oldest fairy tales, which they've kind of homogenized and shined up and packaged so safely in the Disney canon. I think it's a good idea to kind of show them where the dark corners are. So there you go. Coraline, can't tell you enough good things about it. The book is wonderful because the movie, or the other way around, whichever way you like. You could almost sell Coraline as the book with Coraline the movie, and I would totally have no problem with it for them to be just part and parcel, because it's such a wonderful translation of all of the notes from the book. So there you go, Coraline. Next one I had in line was comedy, which there are tons of comedic books that have been made into things. I mean, the first one to come to mind was the P.G. Wodehouse Bertie and Wooster series that was made famous by Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie. But I don't know. I kind of wanted to go a little bit more. I didn't want anything that was so on the nose. So what I picked for this was another thing. Thomas Berger. I was thinking of Little Big Man, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as well. Ken Casey. But those, I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest has been talked to death. So I picked Red Alert, which was the totally super serious book about what would war be like if it was in the hands of someone who wasn't in the top offices. What would happen if a government, or any government, found that one of their best laid plans had turned on them? Usually, in this case, there are a few different adaptations of this book, which makes it even more interesting. But Red Alert was totally groundbreaking for the time to make it seem as if the places that were supposed to ensure our safety weren't safe at all in themselves. So it's funny, the story that kind of went along with Red Alert was there were a bunch of studios that were vying to make an adaptation of the book because I mean, it's just harrowing. It's totally chilling thinking about the post-atomic age, Cold War America and or Russia not being in control of their own nuclear weapons, and the button being pressed and the decision being made by someone in the lower echelons that would have most likely died in any sort of war, and the upper management, which is to say the highest tiers of government, are powerless against their own fail-safe plans. So in this case, and that's one of the titles of the adaptations, I was going to refer to both of these. The first one being, I guess, the more biting commentary, and that would have been Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. And I mean, it's such a famous movie. Go ahead and play that, since we have two of them. It's such a famous movie. Stanley Kubrick took the source material, which was Red Alert, the book that was totally serious as serious could be, and he realized the absurdity of war in every definition, and decided to make it one of the darkest comedies that's ever been done, and total genius. Every time I watch the movie, I find something that I may have missed, or I find some sort of correlation or parallel to make to our current situation and every current situation. The first time I watched it, there were things that made sense then. Second time I watched it, there were things that made sense then. So, yes, if you haven't seen Doctor Strangelove, it lets you know that the world is teetering on a brink, but it may be that it's dancing on the head of a pin at the same time. So maybe we want to burn it all down. Maybe we make these plans and we devise these schemes to completely self-destruct just because that's our nature. We know nothing different. And Sterling Hayden, I mean, he plays General Ripper, and George C. Scott, I watch anything he's in. It's just amazing that someone could look at something like Red Alert with this lethal, cold logic and let us know exactly how illogical it all is. In fact, in Doctor Strangelove, there was actually a cut scene where there was a cream pie fight in the middle of the war room. And that's another thing. The famous war room that they show in practically every military political film after Doctor Strangelove, the war room had never existed. That circular bank of lights, or semicircular bank of lights, over a semicircular or circular bank of desks where these guys all sit and kind of refer to each other, and there's a big wall display of the world behind them. That didn't exist until this movie, but every government ended up having one after this movie. So it was life imitating art. And actually, another portion of that, one of the most famous parts, where the bombardiers are flying in their plane, and basically the planes circle at all times so that they're ready to drop a nuclear bomb at any moment. James Earl Jones ended up being in that plane as a young James Earl Jones. But at one point, when some photographs were sent out to the government as to the interior of the planes and how legitimate they were to normal military craft, they ended up being really upset because they wondered how they got top secret plans so that they could put those buttons and switches in the right places. So it turned out that they accidentally had so many things right in what came to be known as a comedy. It's probably the only thing that saved their neck, really, that they didn't get shut down due to just straight paranoia, which is kind of like at the heart of that movie. But stop for a second and refer to TJ. Yeah, man, a lot of people who had seen Coraline weren't aware that it was a book first, but like I said, when you check out the book, you'll see that it's it's so faithful that watching the movie is almost like reading it in motion. So, but there was a second adaptation of Red Alert that came out around the same time, and it was as serious as you could get as well. It took the other tack to make that movie, and it was called Failsafe. And in the Failsafe, Henry Fonda is the President of the United States, and he's surrounded by all of his dignitaries. I believe Walter Matthau is in that, and he is actually this chilling logician. And he's at in that scene, he's at kind of like a dinner party, and everyone's having refreshments afterwards and stuff, coffee and everything. And he kind of lays down the secrets of the universe, which is to say, we're all dead. It's just a matter of time. At as they say in Fight Club, which is, in my opinion, one of the best book to movie adaptations that's ever existed, which is why I didn't really want to focus on that, because I thought it was so on point that it would almost kind of be a moot point to even talk it over. But Walter Matthau kind of has the stance that on a long enough timeline, the survival rate drops to 0. And in this case, it's either all these weapons that can totally annihilate the Earth many, many times over, that it's only a matter of time. and he doesn't seem to care all that much, really. He's not exactly... He's very, very chilling. He's almost like in a villainous role, except he doesn't do harm, except maybe in the minds of the people who see him as an expert. But it's wild to see Walter Matthau in that position. So, definitely both of the movies are kind of coin flips of the same book. And it's kind of, you have to judge which one you think is more valid, but it's wonderful. Both of them are great. In the comedy arena, there was another one that I had thought of pretty much on the way over here, and it has to do with one of my favorite characters in literature, period, and that is Harry Flashman. In this case, the name of the book that came to mind that ended up, as far as I know, is the only adaptation of the movie, was Royal Flash. And it just had everything going for it. I mean, when it comes to the books, it wouldn't have been the one that I would have chosen. I think that they really wanted to use the name in kind of a punish fashion. And in this case, if anyone's ever been familiar with, I think it's Anthony Hope's The Prisoner of Zenda, where there are look-alike. I think a king is going to be overthrown, so they find a look-alike kind of peasant to put in his place just in case he's assassinated or whatever, and the peasant is totally unaware of all this. I think they kind of made that. I think that's kind of like the premise of Dave, that presidential movie where they need the body double or whatever. But in Royal Flash, it has one of my favorite actors of that time, Malcolm McDowell, who has been slumming it for 15 years or whatever, starring in those god-awful Rob Zombie movies, remaking the Halloween franchise. Stab me if you will. No. Rob Zombie can't pull it off. So we can have gigantic talks about The Shape anytime anyone's ready. And I do mean anyone. But Malcolm McDowell, in his day, in his younger self, was, I think he kind of equates with me with like the early Kiefer Sutherland stuff, Lost Boys, and Flatliners, things like that, where it was just this lethal youth. And so he did, of course he was in A Clockwork Orange, and this movie called If ellipses, like ... If you can find If, definitely watch it. It's about a young man who's like he leads a rebellion inside of a stodgy British private school, and it gets bloody real quick. I totally recommend If. But I was thinking about with Flashman, in order to read these books, George MacDonald Fraser wrote the Flashman books, and there are a ton of them. I think there's something like 10 or 11 of those books. It's a history lesson every time you open one of the books, because it takes place over the span of this complete and utter scoundrel, his career in the military and in politics, and basically kind of thumbing his nose at the monarchy. And in the movie, it seemed like they really got the coward part, because basically he's a he's a completely selfish, egotistical, gigolo, coward, scoundrel, who basically makes good in practically everything he does completely by accident. And here's the trailer for it. I guess they released it on Blu-ray not so long ago. But if he can step out of the way of an incoming cannonball and totally take out the queen, he totally will do it and blame someone else in the process and end up becoming rich. So every book that MacDonald Fraser has ever written about Flashman, I read, and it's just one of those movies where, oh my God, in the current climate of 21st century world, it would almost be impossible to do it justice, because he is a bastard in every sense of any word. He humps everything that moves. He will steal. He will he won't necessarily assassinate, but he'll definitely allow someone to be murdered, just if he can make it out with his ass flesh intact. He does anything possible. And the best part about the books is they just range all over the globe, and every war you could possibly think of. He ends up making it to America. He's in the Boer War. He's part of the British Raj. He's just all over the place. So, and another thing, in this case, in that movie, the antagonist was Oliver Reed, who's like another actor that I just can't get enough of. So, it just sucked, because they had all the pieces in place to make it a good representation, adaptation, translation of any of the Flashman books. I mean, they could have called it Royal Flash and made it the first Flashman book, and then, you know, introduce some of the contents of that or whatever. And it's just one of those things where I think that Royal Flash in and of itself was so derivative of The Prisoner of Zenda that it kind of ignored the novel, wonderful, insane, scandalous things that Flashman did. It kind of cast that as, I mean, it was definitely part of it, because he is who he is or whatever, but they cast it aside in lieu of this Prisoner of Zenda thing, and it just didn't work out. I mean, you have two Malcolm McDowell standing there, so that's something, but it didn't come off for me. I wasn't even able to finish the film because I was waiting, and I was just dying to see a good Flashman adaptation. It didn't work. However, I always get these guys mixed up, but I think it's Dominic West. Dominic West. He played Jigsaw in the third Punisher Warzone. He played Jigsaw in that, and he is chomping at the bit to make a Flashman film, and he actually dressed up as him for Halloween. And if you look up Dominic West Flashman, you wouldn't know because you hadn't read the books yet, but I totally recommend that you do. Have a dictionary handy, have a book of world history handy, but look up Dominic West as Flashman, and you'll see exactly what that guy should look like. So hopefully, with any luck, Dominic West will someday get his Flashman movie made and make it a hell of a lot more faithful than this stinking Royal Flash ended up to be. Anyway, there you go. The next one that came up for me is, what's the time? We may have to make this a part 1, part 2 situation.
An hour and it's 10:35.
10:35. Okay, so I can ramble on a little bit longer, I guess. Okay, so crime, which there are some really good contenders for this one, because for whatever reason it seems like crime films are really easy to bring out faithful from the page to the screen. The one that came up in my mind quickest, I'd have to say, with no doubt about it, was L.A. Confidential by James Ellroy. I had known of Ellroy before the movie came out, and I didn't even know that it was part of his canon. And I remember thinking when I was watching the movie that this really reminds me of James Ellroy, because he managed to take kind of like the glitz and the hope and the good feeling, the post-war coming back to life, and he manages to turn it over and show us all the seedy underbelly of everything that could possibly exist. Every corruption you could possibly find, every scummy beneath, every alley, every sewer is populated by the shining stars of every walk of life, including the mob, Hollywood, the police force, local government, and the little guy. And there's a language and a tenor and a lyricism to his absolute tabloid exposure and the turning over of rocks in this world that exists and had existed and still exists, but for some reason is totally made new. And when L.A. Confidential, the film, came out, when I watched it, it blew me away. It blew me away. Not the least of which because of Russell Crowe and Guy Pearce. I believe that those were that was kind of like their entrance into American film in a big way. I think that they had both been in smaller things over here, but there were so many Oscar nods in this movie, and it's kind of difficult to think about now due to the scandal of Kevin Spacey. But he was kind of like, I'm looking at this now. Everything was perfect about the movie. The direction was crisp. It was quick. It was intelligent, but it was dirty and just wonderfully realized. When I found out that L.A. Confidential was one of a quartet of novels that all kind of ran together, all I could wish was so that somehow it could have been a trilogy. But it wouldn't have worked that way because they ended up making Black Dahlia, which was the first in the series later with Josh Hartnett and Aaron Eckhart, I think. And that was just it sucked. It was not Brian De Palma's best work, but it didn't capture any of the stuff that, for some reason, when someone wears a fedora in L.A. Confidential, it just seems a lot more legitimate than it did in Black Dahlia. Everyone was totally at home in a place that completely exists, but it's flipped on end, so you can see everything wrong about the things that we were supposed to take stock in. L.A. Confidential is wonderful. Every performance is just mind-blowingly excellent in that film. Danny DeVito, David Strathairn, even Kim Basinger was kind of easy to deal with, and ever since Batman '89, I just can't take her. But hopefully she still has a job. I don't know, but totally recommend watching L.A. Confidential, reading anything by James Ellroy, and you'll see these characters reemerge throughout the pages of, especially the I think it's called the L.A. Quartet, and it has to do with Black Dahlia, The Big Nowhere, L.A. Confidential, and I can't remember what White Jazz is the fourth one. And it's funny because you can read them completely out of order, and it'll still make sense because the characters are so well realized as they are in the film that you'll be able to recognize them at a glance and kind of take stock of everything that's happened in their lives before and since. So definitely L.A. Confidential easily is one of the best. It goes along with that thing where there were things that were taken out. There were a lot of side characters that were explored throughout the whole L.A. Quartet. But the screenwriter, I think Brian Helgeland, ended up deciding that the three main cops, he didn't want to have any scenes that didn't have something directly to do with them. And in a book like that, his books are not small. They're long, kind of in-depth exposés of a time period that seems like it's long gone, but it's pretty much everywhere we look now. But it has to be done. I mean, at some point, if you can get the point across and you can distill it down into something smaller than it was and maybe with less fat. Someone said the other day that if you think you're done with creative work, cut 10% out of it, because chances are you'll kind of you'll figure out what can be done away with, and it'll be better for it. So, let's see here. I think that what I'll do is I think I'll go for one more in this category, and then we'll just we'll table it and make a part 2 next week, because there's a lot I want to get through, and I don't want to rush it. But the last one, in this case, it's another one of the crimes. I hadn't had it on my list originally, but I thought of it on the way here, and it's something I kind of want to get into, especially with the advent of the Marvel Universe and the DC cinematic or extended universe. Everyone's obsessed with universes now, but there are graphic novels and comic works that stand on their own in one-shots, and they started kind of trickling in. I can't remember where Road to Perdition falls in, the Tom Hanks Hitman movie. For some reason, I think that was around the time that Iron Man came out, but I could have been wrong. But I think that comics were starting to come into vogue more than ever as properties for cinema in a very serious way. And A History of Violence is one of the ones that I didn't even know that it was a comic until way super after the movie had come out. And it's interesting because it's one of those rare occurrences where the meat of the story and the writing and the tone, it sets you up for everything you need to know, and anything that would interest a filmmaker is in those pages. But when you see the end result, this is one of those cases where, for me, I think that the movie went a lot of places that the book did as well, but it brought a lot of things together that were almost the movie was almost greater than the sum of its parts when it was all over. Because I looked over the graphic novel style and the protagonist. You know, the story is about a simple man in a small town living his life, and then a kind of a vile, murderous, dangerous part of his life that he had memory loss, that he had forgotten. And when an old viper from his past comes back into town after he's found him or whatever, I can't remember off the top of my head if it was like a witness protection thing or if he was injured and then he lost his memory. It's been a while since I've read or watched it, but in the book, it's in black and white, and it's a really simplistic comic book type. Actually, I hesitate to say comic book. It actually kind of reminds me more of kind of like the one panel comics in the newspaper, and it blows my mind that something. So I mean, it's a simple premise, and it's an old premise, of making a new life and then having something from your old life try to take it away from you. It totally resonates with people. And if you see the protagonist in the comic and you see the protagonist in the film, they almost don't resemble each other at all. To me, the guy in the comic like radiates weakness, and in the movie, for me, Viggo Mortensen radiates this calm heart, and it's there are some awkward moments in the movie, but they're necessary, realistic life moments, and it brought so many things to light. Viggo Mortensen was a marvel in this movie because he ends up regaining part, if not all, of his memory later, and this family man who would take a bird with a broken wing out of the street, he ends up showing himself to be a formidable opponent, to say the least. So you have a bunch of rare occurrences happening at once. You have Viggo Mortensen coming to the forefront after a lot of character acting. And oh my god, I don't know that guy's name, but he was in Watchmen, and I love that guy. So like every actor you see in this movie just kicks so much ass. And William Hurt shows up, Ed Harris shows up as these mobsters, and kind of like his dark past coming back to haunt him. And oh man, I think that was Joe Chill from Batman Begins in there, and end up he was in 31. His like murder head or kill head or whatever. No, that's right. But one of the most fantastic things about this movie is that you have someone who's kind of going off type, who ended up kind of following that type and leaving some of his past behind also. It would be David Cronenberg, one of the most famous horror directors of all time, ended up taking on this project, which is this really simple story of kind of like the reclamation of a life and all of the dark baggage that comes with it. It was really unlike his previous stuff, and I think it kind of set him on a path for maybe a little bit more cinematic legitimacy with critics and people who were to watch it. I think a lot of people who watched this movie, if they would have found out that this guy had done Videodrome or Dead Ringers with the body horror just like crazy, you know. And after this, I think after this, he ended up doing what's the one about the Russian mobsters? Oh damn, that's gonna bug me now. But it had that crazy scene in the bathhouse where this guy's like taking a sauna and he's naked in Russia, and these two guys come in to kill him. It's like total full frontal male nudity, absolute just knockdown drag out fight in the middle of this Russian sauna. Eastern Promises, that's what it's called. He ended up doing that. I think he did that after this, and I don't know if he was taking on Viggo Mortensen as kind of like the Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro type of thing, that he's kind of shifted over to Leonardo DiCaprio. But yeah, definitely. I think this is one of the rare occurrences where the movie outshines the book in almost every way. I ended up finding a copy of this not too long ago, and it was interesting. It makes me wonder. The critical acclaim, I wonder if it got out to as many people as they would have wanted it to. And cool side note, the name of the one that I have and the one that's pictured above is a Paradox Graphic Publishing. So the name of the publisher is Paradox. So there you go. I don't know what that means. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But yeah, I think that we're going to put a pin in it right there because I've still got a lot more to go through, and at least you got all your gear.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
He's saying I got 9 left after this, so that doesn't surprise me in the least. And there's a lot of cheating. I ended up putting a science fiction novel in for war, and I don't know. There are a couple things in there, you know, there's a modern Western in the Western category. Just because, I mean, no harm, no foul. I just don't read a whole lot of Westerns. But I'm thinking, you know, actually, you know what? I just thought of another one. So I'll talk about that next week. But yeah, let me see. Cinematic Reality is the 605 opus, Brandon Pruitt's opus. When's that coming out? I know it's got to be soon. Okay. Okay, he's going to look it up for me. I thought that it was the 20th or the 21st. It just slipped my mind. But this one has been a long time coming. For the inception of Cinematic Reality, the writing of the 25th. So make sure to go to Greendale Cinemas. You know what time on that?
Yeah, I'll throw up a flyer in just a second.
Okay, so yeah, so he's going to throw up the flyer. So you know exactly when to get down to the Greendale Cinema. Come one, come all. Definitely check this out. The second feature from Brandon Pruitt directing, and I believe he wrote it, didn't he too? Or yeah. It's from a story, someone else's story, and he wrote the screenplay?
Alex Gottman just thought of the story and he wrote it. Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. Alex Gottman, kind of like story elements, and Brandon Pruitt ran with it and ended up making his second feature that will be coming out October 20th. At the Greendale Cinema in Greendale, Indiana, 47025. Definitely check it out. Go to, it's probably greendalecinema.com, I'd imagine. And see if you can get I don't know if you can get your tickets beforehand. Check out Studio 605's website. and check him out on Facebook. TJ's involved with that as well, so Heckles and Horror is coming up tomorrow night. Do you know if he's got a subject? He's probably like me. He doesn't... it's not as if we come up with this stuff at the last minute. What we do is, you know, we're showmen, right? P.T. Barnum and shit. We like to keep this stuff under wraps. That way, you know, when it's ready to go, then we just put it out there for you. It's because we know, I mean, Facebook, like I've said before, is a fickle mistress. It's a fickle mistress. If we tell you about something a week and a half ago, you're gonna forget. There's the Kavanaugh freaking thing. Hopefully he's burned alive in a few days. We can only hope. I mean, shit. America, Mexico, and Canada, I guess we're trading again. I don't know. The world is a crazy ass place. Yeah. In fact, I just found out about a writer from the Washington Post has just come out with a book called The Apprentice. Donald Trump, I think it's called like Donald Trump, the Presidency and the Subjugation of America or something like that. So, yeah, apparently they had like 9 sources before they went to press for the for all the evidence for the Russian tampering of our voting system. But hey, what are we gonna do? We can't do anything. We're just a little guy, right? Except for the midterm voting that should be coming up soon. So make sure if you, well, I guess I haven't talked about the Dominant strain yet, so that won't make sense. I guess Dr. Strangelove fits, though. Unless you want a Dr. Strangelove situation, definitely get down to the polls and vote for under the midterms. I am not a political person. That's probably the first political thing I've said. Even close, that's not even really political. It's just kind of like, you know, in that realm. Not everyone is all bad. Not everyone is all bad, but you kind of have to show some good too once in a while, and you have to be somewhat of a statesman, and you have to be able to, you know, not to insult, degrade, and lower everyone that you get near. Anyway, I'm leaving it right there. Read every book within your... Oh, let me. This is so funny. You would have thought I would have known about this 1,000 years ago, but I just recently found out, and it's probably because I've got so many library cards. I've got library cards from everywhere. And in the past, I thought that it was a no-no. I thought that it was totally against everything. But I think that libraries, kind of in the current climate where they're just disappearing right and left, being strangled, I think that they want to work hand in glove with as many as they possibly can, even outside of the state and county lines and boundaries. I found out about Hoopla, which it's probably been around since the beginning of time. I don't know. It takes me a while to get the hang of these things, but it is a borrowing app that you can get for your phone through most libraries, where you can borrow books and graphic novels, music, audiobooks, videos, practically everything you can get at the library you can get on your phone. And they let you have 10 a month. So you don't have to worry about turning them back in. They ended up automatically cycling back and leaving your phone. I think that you have the choice to renew them. And, you know, being a big page and paper guy, you wouldn't think that I'd be all about this. But personally, I think that technology is not going away. If anything, it's going to get more and more virtual as it goes along. And personally, reading literacy is more important to me than I was accused of being a hipster the other day. Just not because of what physical form my reading material took, but just that I kind of admitted that if something is really, really super popular, I tend to avoid it. Only because I just know that it's going to be there, you know. If, like, for instance, I mean, if you want kindling, go to any thrift shop. I guarantee you're going to find one of the Twilight Saga. Pick up a couple of them suckers for $0.25 and throw them on the fire if you need something, to keep yourself warm this winter. They are going to be around because every person and their aunt, mostly their aunts and stepmoms, bought those damn books. So when it comes to something that breaks huge, I just bide my time. I know it's going to be there when I'm ready to read it. And when the hype dies down and when the movies are already, gone to Blu-ray, I'm going to be able to read that somewhere or another. And for the same thing as classics, I think I talked about this a couple times before. I still haven't read Great Expectations. So there are things that exist and are always going to exist. But for the things that don't, definitely check out the available resources that you can get for free through government programs and places like libraries that are luckily they're starting to plateau again. For a while there, they were disappearing off the face of the earth, and there are a lot of them that still are, but I think that it might be slowing now that people realize that knowledge is power and stupidity is going to get us killed. I think that they have figured out to check out a library for more than their internet accessibility. So definitely check out Hoopla at your local library, and keep your eyes peeled. I can't stress it enough. Keep your eyes peeled for library sales. It's the way to go. It's the way to go, man. I can't even tell you. One of these days, a lot of people tell me not to do it because then I'd be kind of like giving away, which it's dumb. It's not like it's a secret or anything. They exist, but one of these days I'll get Andrew along for the ride and have him film me at one of these places so you can see how it is done. It is done by me, buddy. I'm telling you. The people who run the place, it's so funny. I am tooting my own horn all over the place. I don't give a shit. I don't care. Because the people that run the place point me out to people so they can figure out how to pack their bags. Because I've got it, man, I have got it down to a science. I have those bags so damn tight, if you flicked them, they would just explode into a million pieces. My car was so packed full of those book bags that I was telling, actually a librarian, wonderful librarian from Ohio County Public Library, and the librarianesses, much love, much love. I told her that if I crashed my car, a library would spontaneously come into being wherever I crashed, because, oh my God, I was full to the brim. Everybody was like, oh man, you must have a pretty nice truck. And I'm like, no. Chevy Prism. That's right. Oh my God. The shocks were screaming. Anyhow, be that as it may, I'm getting loopy. So, as always, beware your human heart. This has been the Diabolical Index for 10/1, October 1st, the beginning of the month of Halloween, 2018. Definitely check out Amber's Antiques in the Huga House and Main Street in Rising Sun, so you can check out Adeline and her story. There is a creepy, creepy lady hanging out in front of Amber's Antiques that you need to check her out and see what her story is all about. It is a creepy tale. But Main Street will be having their Scarecrow contest, and I thought that I had more time, but I guess I missed the deadline. But they're extending things for people who weren't ready. So I don't know how I'm going to top Adeline, but I'm going to try and see if I can't. I don't know, put a hex on something and have it move when people walk by, or I'll just throw something together last minute like I normally do. But with any luck, I'll be back next Monday at 9 p.m., closer to 9 p.m. than it was tonight. I have to say this is probably the latest we've done in a while. We were doing pretty well getting at 9 o'clock. But there's a lot of stuff to get uploaded, and he'll be ready for next time because he's got it now, as long as he doesn't wipe his ass. No, wait. No, wrong. Wipe his computer. He know what I meant. Everybody knows what I meant. But this is the time to close. Yeah. This is where the pages of the Uncanny reside, and as always, keep it squirrely.
The squirrel was magic!